Hello and welcome everyone again. On behalf of GSA's Career Development Subcommittee, I welcome all the panelists and the participants in today's workshop. I want to share a few notes and ground rules with everyone in attendance today. Please note that all the views and opinions shared in today's workshop are those of the panelists themselves and not of the organizations they represent or have worked for. In addition, any mention of a company by a panelist is not an endorsement of that given company or the brand. So to ensure that everyone is, this workshop is a welcoming space for everyone, we want to briefly go over some code of conducts. So today's event, as you might have seen, is being recorded. So just a reminder for the Zoom meeting again, that please keep your mics and cameras turned off at all times. And for the questions, we have already collected questions from all of you for our panelists. However, if you would like, we welcome you to ask questions to our panelists by dropping them in the chat box to everyone. And however, if you're disrespectful in the space, we will ask you to leave the workshop. So please be mindful of others. And our committee members will be collecting the questions from the chat box for the panelists. So next slide, please. So today's panel discussion has been organized by the GSA's Career Development Subcommittee, together with Madhu and Jason, who are the co-chairs of the committee. Saurav and I are co-hosting this event. However, every member of the committee who has been showcased here has been instrumental in making this event happen. Also, special thanks to Jessica, who is the program director of the Engagement in Early Career programs with GSA, and also Balin, who is not showcased here, but is also being instrumental in making this workshop happen. So we'll go to the next slide now. And we have our panelists in the room today. So let's begin our discussion today by first allowing our panelists to briefly introduce themselves by telling us their current position and a brief summary of what their current position entails. Also, their academic and professional trajectory, and a skill that they have nurtured or cultivated and would like to discuss about today with our attendees. So I will call upon Dr. Marimelia Porcionatto to introduce herself to us. Dr. Marimelia.
Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you and nice to be here. Thank you so much for this invitation. As Abby said, my name is Marimelia Porcionatto. I'm from the Federal University of São Paulo in Brazil. And I'm a biochemist by training, and I teach at the School of Medicine of our university. And I also do research in neurobiology. I work with responses of cells from the brain when the brain is subjected to trauma or stroke or neurodegeneration. And I was invited here today because I also run and I sometimes swim and bike, and we can talk about that later. And thank you for the invitation again.
Thank you, Dr. Marimelia. And I see Professor Cassandra Extavour here. So Professor Extavour, if you would like us to know about yourself and your current position and your hobby that you've mentioned.
Sure. My name is Cassandra Extavour. I work at Harvard University, where I'm a full professor in 2 departments, organismic and evolutionary biology and molecular and cellular biology. And I'm also a Howard Hughes medical investigator. And so what else? My lab studies the evolution of development. So we study how genes make cells do the correct things during embryonic development in animals and how those genetic programs evolved in animals. And what else should I say? My side hustle or my other, I'm a singer. Yeah, for sure. I've been a musician my whole life, and I've been a professional singer for a couple of decades.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Extavour. And Dr. Sidharth Mohan, if you could introduce yourself to us.
Hi, first of all, thank you for inviting me. This is such an honor. My name is Sidharth. You can call me Sid. And I'm a senior scientist in the Expression Sciences division at Johnson & Johnson. So I'm a biophysicist by training, and I support the expression purification platforms within the biologics space at J&J. I've been here for 2 years, and prior to that, I was actually in the Upper Valley at a small biotech. Yeah, and my hobbies are mostly around music. So I see maybe some overlap with Dr. Extavour, and I'm a drummer. So I've been part of many bands over the years when I was back home in India, and most of my stuff is, I think, derivative from that. So we'll get into that over the course of the panel. But
Sure, of course. Thank you. Thank you. So we would like to now begin our discussion today with Professor Extavour. And so Professor Extavour, if you could briefly discuss your journey so far, like when did you realize that you had to professionally nurture your hobby? I've been reading about your work that you've been influenced by your father's work in terms of music scenes. So if you could briefly discuss that, how did you go about your professional singing journey so far?
Sure. I always wanted to be a musician. That was the only career goal I ever had. I started playing instruments from the age of 3. My father was a musician, not professionally in the sense that that's not how he made his living, although he did make some money and recorded an album and would have concerts that I also had to play in. So from a very young age, I was playing music. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed being on stage. And I learned to play the flute when I was about 10 years old, the modern transverse flute made of metal. And I really enjoyed that. And so I decided I wanted to be a professional flautist. But I never took lessons. Maybe my family didn't have money for that. And so I was sort of self-taught, and I would listen to recordings and borrow music from the library and try to learn it. And then when I was ready to go to undergraduate after high school, I had developed an interest in science, kind of very naive and very superficial and very late in high school, an interest in science. So I was, and because I hadn't taken lessons before, I was honestly, I regret this because it's a decision that I made because I was afraid of the outcome. And that's not a reason that I like to make a decision, but I did not audition for a conservatory or any kind of professional music training because I didn't think that I was going to be able to compete with people who had had private lessons and, you know, more exposure to classical music than I had had. So I kept playing flute in some orchestras as an undergraduate. And then I started to sing pretty casually, just as something to do, another group activity with music. I had a brief phase in high school where I thought I wanted to be a choral conductor, but that was short-lived. But I didn't take singing seriously as an instrument until towards the end of my undergraduate, when some directors that I was singing with in large groups and then in smaller groups heard my voice and suggested that I should take it more seriously. So I auditioned for some professional gigs, and I got some professional work. And that was very exciting. And that was at the end of my undergraduate. But by that time, I was also now seriously interested in science. And I had learned that I could do a PhD and that would cover my costs. So I was doing other jobs during high school and university to pay for school. And I learned that if I did graduate school in science, I would have enough money as a stipend where I wouldn't have to have another job. It wasn't a lot, but it was just enough for me. So I decided to do graduate school in genetics, and then also to take singing more seriously. And so I sought out voice teachers for the first time as a graduate student and studied with them and sang as often as I could, auditioned for things, did performances, joined different groups. And then at the end of my PhD, I thought that I was going to finish the PhD and then sing full time. My teacher, my voice teacher, was very convinced that this is what I should do. And I thought it was a good idea, and science was fine, but singing was better. But then I met some scientists who were from a very different scientific sort of, they were very different people, very different culture. The scientific environment that I was trained in as a PhD student was very homogeneous and very narrow, very good, but just one way of doing things. And meeting scientists who did things in more different ways was exciting to me. And so I did a postdoc. Also, I had learned by this time that such a thing existed as a postdoc and that I still could continue to get paid enough to cover my small expenses. I didn't have any dependents or anything. And so I did a postdoc in evolutionary developmental genetics, and I continued to sing and audition and study with my same teacher that I had had in graduate school. And then I had the idea, to maybe try running a lab if I had the chance and see if I enjoyed it. So I applied for this job and got the job and decided to keep and kept singing. At that point, I never questioned whether I should stop singing. It was just a question of how much can I do and how much do I want to do and what will the cost be at that time. So when I moved to Boston to set up my lab, I didn't sing for the first year. I was very focused on the lab. And then I started to update my CV and find out who I could audition for and do some auditions around Boston, and then started singing in my second year and every year you get to meet more people, you get some more gigs. So just kept going like that.
That is so inspiring. I mean, we knew the Drosophila genetics side of you, but this was something that we all are so inspired. So thank you for that introduction. And Dr. Marimelia, your turn now. Would you like to introduce us with your the other professional activity? And
Yes,
how did you go about this? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you. So just to clarify, I'm not a professional athlete. I have never been a professional athlete. So this is a hobby that I take very seriously. And so it does take a lot of my time. And I start running quite late. I did my postdoc in Boston at the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute at Harvard Medical School. And as everybody knows, many people run in Boston because of probably motivated by the marathon. That is wonderful. And by the time it was 2001, I lived there from 2001 to 2003. I didn't run at that time. And one of my lab partners, she was a runner. And one time I was talking to her and saying things that non-runners usually say. That is, it's so boring to run. I don't understand why you guys do that. You go out in the snow, in the sun, in the heat, in the cold. And then she suggested that I should start very slowly, like 5 minutes, and then progress the famous 10% per week. And I did that because I'm kind of obsessive with things. So I just took that as an experiment. I said, okay, I'm gonna try to see what runners enjoy so much about running. And then I progressed to running like 30 minutes in the treadmill, and then I took it to the streets, and then I got hooked in running. And I have done since then. I did 4 marathons, 5 ultra marathons. So the marathons were in Paris, Boston, of course. I had to go there, and Berlin, and I'm forgetting. Oh, Amsterdam. And I did several 5Ks and 10Ks and half marathons. And then from 2008 to 2016, I ventured into triathlons. But it's because I'm very slow, this doesn't matter much when you're running, but in triathlons, they have several cuts. Cuts in the swimming, cuts after the biking and running. So I just did a few of them, and many of them I was cut or I was last, but I don't care if I'm the last one or if I'm cut. I just sign up for the next one and keep doing it because I really enjoy it. And so I think that's it for now. And so just to say the longest distance I did in just one go was like 71 kilometers. And I did 2 times 100 kilometers. But this was a multi-stage run in the mountains in Chile. And so it's called the Cruci. The Cross of the Andes, and it's a very beautiful race. If anyone ever want to come down to the south and run this race, it's great. So that's it. Thank you.
Well, that is personally so inspiring for me as well. Before I knew you, I never had any professional athletics hobby or anything, but I started running slowly myself when I joined my postdoc. I did like a mile and a half, and then eventually over the year, I have developed this hobby. And only recently, last month, I was able to run a half marathon. I took like maybe 2 hours and 20 minutes, but that was something that I had never expected from myself. And thank you for inspiring me more. And I will look forward to a full marathon sometime. So Dr. Mohan, now your turn. Would you be able to go?
Yeah. So this thing with running, right? I can relate to to wondering why, how you keep boredom at bay when running. I really struggled with that, and I gave up on running. I just couldn't do it. But I found my adrenaline rush through mountain biking, and actually New Hampshire was very conducive to that. So I took that hobby sort of later on in life, and I'm very glad I sort of approached it with an open mind and said, okay, I've always liked riding bicycles, and let's try this terrain with ups and downs, and let's see what that pans out. But that's just a segue from my original thing, which was music, right? So for me, music became a thing that I very organically I started milestoning, right? So it was emancipation for me. I think I grew up being a very shy, very introverted person who most people, and I know Madhu from GSA right here, and she will deny that vehemently, but music became an output for me. And when I realized that there was this sort of talent that I could hone and shape, it opened up another world for me, right? So I sort of took to it very organically and went with the flow. So part rebellion, part emancipation, part artistic output. I started seeing how it began to impact my life in a good way. And so I often joke that I'm a scientist because I'm a failed musician, and I cling to that because it is something that I default to when I'm not putting on the garb or the persona of a scientist in my day job, right? This is something I hold very dear to my heart and pursue it, sometimes almost in secret. Like it's not something that I've put out there too much, but over the years, I did have the privilege of touring with the band locally in India and attending lots of gigs as a concert goer and as a performer. And I even started, when the sort of career trajectory shifted back to, grad school and doing, PhD level science, I took up the mantle of being a music journalist. And so my engagement with music sort of transformed. I still play, but that's kind of the long story short, if that means anything.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you, sir. This is so interesting and inspiring to all of us. So I'm sure we have touched upon this briefly, but then I would like to go over, this is some of the questions that our attendees would like to know from all our panelists today. What are some benefits and challenges of having the second activity or the hobby that you have nurtured professionally, and whether in some way or the other it has helped you in nurturing your scientific career? So Professor Extavour, if you could go over that.
Yeah, sure. For me, the number one benefit is that music has always been a part of my life, and so I need to do it. It's something that I'm very unhappy if I don't do it, and my life has never been without it. So for me, it has to be somehow in there. But in general, a benefit that I see to something that is an extremely intense, absorbing activity that's not your science is that it gives your brain a rest from science. Science is very absorbing and very demanding intellectually. And of course, we have times when we need to focus all of our attention. And like if you're, squeezing something for so long, your hand will get tired. You need to give your brain a rest from these things. And for me, I achieve the most effective rest from the sorts of thinking that I have to do in science when I'm doing something that's very... Sorry, should I stop talking? I was muted. Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Sorry for the interruption. Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. My role as a professional singer is completely different from my role as a scientist. And so I need to engage other parts of myself. And importantly, it is so absorbing. I cannot be thinking about science at the same time. And so this really gives me a huge break. And then the specific thing that I do, which is singing and performing, is actually gives me, I think, I definitely draw on many of the same approaches when I present my work in science, because communication of our science is something we have to do all of the time in oral form, very often, one-on-one, small meeting, big conference, whatever. And so many of the experiences, many of the strategies that work for me to do this effectively when I'm singing also work effectively to give a talk. So those are some benefits for me.
All right, great, thank you. So coming over to you, Dr. Marimelia, would you like to discuss the benefits and challenges? At the same time, how do you maintain a healthy work-life balance with the second activity that you have?
Yeah, okay, thank you. some of the benefits are similar to what Cassandra just said. So our mind goes somewhere else besides science or writing grants or reports or whatever we have to do or teaching. And also running has the obvious physical benefits for health, right? So I think I don't even need to mention that because everybody's aware that exercise is good for you. So besides that, I think that another benefit that I get from it is that I meet different people, people outside the academia. I think it's similar to what my colleagues in music also probably have that too, because we meet people that are from all different activities and professions and different ages. In running, we can run with a bunch of different persons, and also I have always been very anxious, and my family has some mental health issues, like my mother was bipolar. We have some depression in the family, so I have close family members that have depression, and I think that running really helps with that, with the mental health, getting me, my head a little bit more in shape than if I didn't do any exercise. So this is also a benefit, and similar to what we have when we are planning a grant or doing some kind of research. Running also involves planning, and we cannot be focused on immediate results. We have to think very far away. For instance, if I'm training for an ultra marathon, I cannot say, well, next week I'm going to run an ultra marathon. I need some planning, like 6 months sometimes, or 1 year. I have to plan 1 year ahead. And running really helped me with that, because I had problems, during my career. I always wanted everything like right away. So I think this helped me to kind of plan a little, or plan a little bit more than I was used to do. And the challenge, I think that the main challenge is to find time. And usually I run very early in the morning. So I wake up at 4:30 or 5 in the morning, because I don't like to run in the afternoon or at night, because I just a preference of mine. So I have to wake up very early. And when I'm training for long distance, I have to use my weekends to do that, because it's almost impossible to do like a 2 or 3 or 4 hours run during a weekday. I mean, it's impossible for me. And so I use a lot of time on my weekends for training. And this sometimes can be tricky when if I'm pressed with time. I usually let the running and will do my work, of course, because this is I'm not, as I said before, I'm not a professional runner, so I have to keep my job and keep the grants coming. So many times when I don't have enough time to train, I will sacrifice training to do whatever I have to do, for my job. That's it.
Well, thank you for bringing that mental health challenge and issues to the fore, because a lot of grad students and postdocs here, including me, find it very hard to find this equilibrium between the research activities that we do and the mental health issues. So thank you. This is an important topic to touch. So Sid, to you, the benefits and challenges questions and how do you maintain a healthy work-life balance? Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I'm just going to riff off what both of my colleagues have said, which is the idea of mental state. I mean, it is a topic that it is the elephant in the room, and we have to absolutely talk about it. And I think hobbies are that amazing short circuit to address that. When drumming and biking, I really chase the flow state, which is where there is a sort of a continuum between you, the instrument, and the sticks, or you, the bike, and the ground. And the importance of achieving this flow state, I think, cannot be overstated. It really is getting in your head a little bit and cutting out the noise, whether it's the pressure of your life or your work or whatever, and being present. I think that is something that is very achievable with hobbies, especially if you really like them. You've maybe developed some skill, and you're a little more competent than when you were first a novice. So it is an achievable goal, very easily. So I believe that. The benefits, so that's obviously one of the main big benefits. I think it helps with just general neuroplasticity, right? I mean, you are keeping your brain, you're stimulating it with different kinds of inputs that may or may not have a physical component to it as well. For me, drumming is a little bit of both. I get the sort of auditory input, and the physicality of it is also something I can indulge in, which is really, really powerful, I think. And you're processing different kinds of knowledge, right? Who's to say how that impacts you in the long run in terms of how you perceive your own scientific work? So, the odds are probably in your favor that there will be a long-term benefit. So I highly recommend that you find some hobby. For example, you see folks in like data science and folks who work on AI stuff. Many of them have hobbies on the side that are like photography oriented, or they're doing like videography because they see light, they see patterns. So there's such a sort of unaddressed overlap, right? It's there. I mean, we just have to go out and grab those opportunities to pursue those hobbies. And so all of that is the upside. But the downside is, what my colleague said. There is the challenge of time, even money. Yes, I sacrificed buying a car so I could buy a drum kit. Like, it was like one of those life choices. Like, oh my God, do I get a car and commute to work every day, or do I buy a drum kit? And I went with the drum kit because I was like, this is important. I'll get my walk. I'll get my 20,000 steps each day walking to work. But it is a question of what you want, and weighing out what is beneficial to you in the long run, I think. Yeah, and commitment, right? At the end of the day, it's not something that you have to force yourself to do. Like, then it's not a hobby, then it becomes a job. This is something that you can descend to, ramp down from. Like, if you're doing intense work in the lab, and that's all of us here pretty much, then you have to be able to pursue something that is a little low stakes. So that's the reason why I never really milestoned what I did and pursued it as a goal. But that isn't to say that sometimes you have to do it. Like Dr. Marimelia was saying, you have to plan around running. Like, you can't just get up and run a marathon. I completely get that. So to the extent that you have to do it. But don't choose your hobby based on whether you have to manage it as a project. Like, follow your hobby based on your passions first, figure out the mechanics of it later, is generally what I would say.
That is so true, and my words to it. And we'll come back to this and discuss this a little bit more later. So coming back to you again, Professor Extavour, on these benefits and challenges and maintaining a healthy work-life balance. For example, if you have a concert to go to, at the same time, you also have projects running up in the lab. So how do you maintain a healthy work-life balance in that situation? And what advice would you have for our undergrads and grad students and postdocs for that?
I think, my best advice is that whether it's, sort of 2 different careers, or whether it's, 3 different graduate students, or, 6 different children, or whatever, as life goes on, your attention is going to be requested in more and more and more different avenues. And so for me, what helps me with that is to try to think, before those demands come forward, what are my priorities? What are my principles? What will be my guiding principles when somebody asks me to do something, or when something comes across that I want to do? Will I decide based on priority order, like the order that I read the emails? Will I decide on the amount of money that might be involved, or the novelty of the result that might emerge? And there's no right answer to this, but it's important to know what your answer is, so that when you're faced with these decisions that you're asked to make, you spend as little time as you can trying to work out the logic of the decision, because constant decision making is exhausting and you have more and more and more of it to do. So for example, I was asked to do an opera that overlaps with a conference that I was asked to be a keynote speaker at. My decision that I made a long time ago was I go with prior commitment. I had already committed to this conference 2 years ago. I would love to do this opera. I want to work with this director. It might give me more opportunities in the future, but I'm not going to say no to my colleagues for the conference because I already told them that I would say yes to the conference 2 years ago. So I declined the opera. That's my personal, way of doing it. Or, for rehearsals or even for things in the lab, a big sort of decision factor is, can it work with my family? Right? There are certain times of day when we agree, or certain months or certain, sort of timeframes. It's okay if I commit to something that's this many days, but not that many days because it conflicts with family obligations. So deciding for yourself ahead of time as much as possible what your priorities are and what your goals are will help you with all of these decisions. They don't make them infallible, but you have to learn to say no, and learning to say no is just like learning anything else. You have to practice. Just keep doing it, and it will get. It's not that it gets easier, but you find your strategies of dealing with it, right? But it is essential, because if we don't say no sometimes, saying no sometimes means we're closing ourselves off to other opportunities because we can't do everything all the time.
If I had to take like 2 words from just what you just said, it would be decision and discipline. And I would say a lot of people here would agree to that. So thank you. So coming back to the next question that we have. So this is to you, Sid. So because a lot of grad students here are also interested in a career in industry, and you are one of them. So they are looking up to you. And the question that they have is, what are some soft and hard skills that is required and most valued in a non-academic or industry jobs, and whether these have been improved by some of the soft skills, such as like public dealing, public speaking, or networking that you have from your second hobby, whether that had helped you in all these aspects.
Oh, absolutely. I think at the end of the day, irrespective of your level of skill, your individual skill, you are a person. So there's a person behind the scientist. That's one. And you are dealing with people, and people are complex, diverse individuals. There's diversity of thought, there's diversity of origin. Being able to navigate this landscape towards a common goal is the secret to success. That's it. And any skills that you can bring to the table that really advance that in a collegial manner, which is, understanding how to communicate, being a good listener, being a good project manager, understanding how to handle resources. All of that is tantamount to success in general. I mean, I wouldn't really parse between academia versus industry in that regard. And so much of that came from being in a band. Simple. I'm just going to boil it down to that. I was this sort of young, rebellious, sort of very enthusiastic drummer in a band, and we had to figure out our sound, right? So that was the common goal. What is your sound going to be like? Can you regularize your practice schedule? Can you build some discipline into this? Can you meet every week at least? And you have your day job, you have to go to college, whatever it is, but you also want to pursue the hobby. And can you also motivate your bandmate? Can you motivate the lazy guitarist to turn up and learn his riffs? Like, that was the kind of conversation that we will end up having. And that may have been a primer for how you communicate with your peers and your direct reports, right? You can show them that that you can incentivize people more effectively. You can communicate those incentives more effectively. So of course there is an overlap, but I will say this, it has to be organic, right? This is not something that you should say, I'm going to pursue a hobby so I can be a better project manager. That is the wrong way to approach it. I think a hobby is a hobby. So I'm a firm believer in that. You have to let yourself grow as a person, right? So there are multiple facets to our personalities, and hobbies allow you to advance those facets. And it's really an open game. You don't know what you will learn, what you will see, and what you will experience. So it forces you to be open. I think in general, all of us here are scientists, right? So that openness to novelty, like Professor Extavour was saying, is important to figuring out what you want to do, how you want to do it. And so that links back to your hobbies. And so, yes, public speaking, communication, working towards a common goal, learning how to compromise, learning how to say no. Sometimes that's just not the riff we want to play. All right, I have to suck it up and play a different kind of a beat, pun intended, right? So there's all of these unintentional outcomes, which are beautiful. And I'll put it this way, this is all in hindsight, right? When you're in the moment pursuing the hobby, you're not thinking about being a project manager. So it is still important in the pursuit of your hobby to be present in while you're on stage, while you're on the track, whatever it is. Leave the outcomes to later. So I pursue it very organically, and now that I look back, I'm like, wow, okay, this has been quite a journey. So, yeah.
Well, thank you, Dr. Marimelia. Would you like to add something to that? Like, what are the soft skills that in an academic setting people will acquire, and whether your hobbies have helped in some way to develop those skills?
Well, I just want to agree with Sid, because with the fact that you cannot plan to have benefits from your hobby. For instance, I did not start running because I thought it would clear my head or it would help me with planning. This all came after. So I totally agree with what he said. And you have to follow your heart. Sometimes you have to try different things as a hobby. I love music, but I'm terrible at playing. I studied piano when I was a child, but I'm terrible at playing. I have a horrible voice. I cannot sing, but I love music. So I listen to music, but it doesn't become a hobby for me because I don't have enough skills to do that. And the same thing with like collective sports. Anything that has a ball involved, I'm terrible. I cannot throw a ball, anything like that. And then after trying many things, many different, I tried dancing, which I also love. And then finally, as a challenge for myself, I found running. But I mean, I started running, I was almost 40 years old. I'm 58, I'm gonna be 59 this November. So it took me a long time to find, a hobby that stuck with me for 20 years. And I hope I'm gonna be like 120 years old and I will be still like, trying to run. And I think that this is what we have to do is, so I totally agree. And we don't foresee the benefits. We can only see when it's done. But you have to enjoy whatever you're doing.
That is so true and inspiring to me personally. If you could do it 59 or 58, I could surely do it in 34, 35 or whatever. So thank you. So the next question is for you, Professor Extavour again, that how does your primary employer see your second professional activity?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
The question is, how does your primary employer see your second activity? Like, do they have any opinions about you singing, going outside, engaging in your other professional activity? And do they have any opinions about that? Or yeah,
I have no idea because it's not their business and I don't discuss it with them. My employer is the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, and I also have obligations professionally to Harvard University, who was my employer up until recently. And I fulfill my professional obligations to them, and I don't discuss my other choices in my life, including getting paid to do something different. I don't discuss it with my chair or my colleagues or my dean because it's not relevant to my job here. That doesn't mean that I'm trying to hide it, but it doesn't come up in conversation unless they say, do you have any, do you like music? Or I heard that you sing. I mean, by now, many people that I know from science, they know that I also sing, but I keep the different areas of my life fairly separate. I have my science professional community that I've built up over many years, and I have my musical professional community that I've built up over many years. Most of the people that I sing with don't know that I spend most of my time running a genetics lab, not because I hide it from them, but it doesn't come up. I'm there to sing. I'm there to fulfill a specific role. I have a professional relationship with them and we're making music together. And yeah, so it doesn't come up. Now, having said that, and I mean, now I have my own lab. And so I have a lot more freedom, of course, and privilege and power than I ever had before. So how was it when I was a graduate student is maybe more relevant. To be perfectly honest, I had a PI who was absent almost all the time. He came to lab once a week for a lab meeting. You had a discussion with him about your work a couple of times a year. And other than that, he really didn't know what was happening on a day-to-day basis. Were you there? Were you not there? He didn't know because he wasn't there. We were there a lot. We worked very hard. But if I left early, or I wasn't there on Wednesday, or I was gone for a week because I had a tour, I just come in extra on the weekends. One thing that I always did was just make sure that my experiments were still going. Sometimes I took the flies with me. I worked with Drosophila. So it didn't come up when I was in grad school because we interacted so rarely, and we really only interacted about the science that, you know, and then as a postdoc, again, I had a very hands-off PI. I was the only one working on my project. It was a new project that I started because I wanted to start a project in this lab. So I was working on it on my own, and I got a lot of freedom and independence. And I think he knew that, you know, I also sang sometimes, but it didn't, it didn't really come up. So I didn't, you know, what is also clear though, and I'm not trying to say that there's no, there's a huge sort of fantasy in the academic world, especially in the sort of very research intensive academic world, that unless you are dedicating every fiber of your being and every firing of every synapse to science, you can't do good science. I just believe that's a fantasy, but it's a very pervasive one, and one that gets sort of pushed at all levels of academic research. I can't speak for other professional areas of science, right? But so that is definitely the case. But I think I think what's helped me not feel that pressure as much is that my social life and my personal life and my science life have never been completely overlapping. They've always been relatively separate, maybe small overlap. So the people I work with as a scientist, they know me as a scientist. And some of my friends happen to be scientists, but not most. And then in music, separate music. So we discuss what we discuss. And so that's how it has worked out, you know, for me. And, you know, sometimes I have students who come and say, you know, I'm a dancer, I'm an actor. And they may say, I know that you're a singer and this is very inspiring. And so I had one student say they would like to do a PhD where they did, you know, sort of basically half the lab work that other students would do because they have this very intense passion. I said, no, I'm not interested in that. I run a lab where we are all full-time scientists. It's amazing that you have other great things in your life, but we're all here trying to achieve things to a certain standard. And that's what we all agree to do, including myself. And I think it's amazing. It's fantastic for you as a person. You have these other things, but this is how my lab runs. And I hold everyone to this standard. I don't disapprove of it. And I certainly don't think that people have to be in the lab nonstop 24/7. I'm not. And I say to them, I don't expect you to be that, but we're going by what goals are we setting for the science? And let's achieve those goals in a way that works for you. You set your own schedule, however that works. And I firmly believe that to do great work, it does not require us to be in the lab 24/7 all our lives. Not in my field anyway.
That is so true. And the take-home message, if I have to take for all of us, would be setting up healthy boundaries, setting up healthy professional boundaries. And this is something that I also tell my undergrad mentees that the goal is to not just show up, but to achieve something. And this has been helpful in many ways to all of us collectively. So, Sid, would you like to add something to this?
I was just vehemently nodding as Professor Extavour was saying that, because productivity is far more important than just grinding away 24/7 just to show or portray an image that you're working hard. Like that, let's not kid ourselves. There's work to be done. We can be focused, and if you find that balance, you'll actually be more productive than you ever anticipate, because your brain and your body are benefiting from being well rested for one, having a schedule for one, having an outlet, whether it's boxing with your advisor's face on the punching bag, or screaming your lungs out on stage. Find your catharsis. It has to be healthy. I think that's definitely something I wanted to add and extend based on what was said. So there will be compromises, and that's okay if you have that. If you have perspective and if you can course correct, that's fine. Sometimes priorities can get flipped, mistakes happen, but if you ascribe that to a formative learning experience, then you've benefited and grown as a person. So that's okay. Maybe I stayed out too late and I should have gotten into lab a little earlier. Well, I guess now I have to come in and make up for it. That's okay. If you can learn from your mistakes and you can reprioritize, then you're on the right track. You have the benefit of your advancing your scientific career and your hobbies, and you're finding that balance over time. So you shouldn't beat yourself up if something goes astray once or on occasion. So I would say, that's it.
All right, thank you for expanding onto that. And my next question is to you, Dr. Marimelia. What advice would you have for an undergrad applying for a grad school about keeping healthy hobbies outside the research or the work?
Well, I know the realities are different in different countries, so I'm going to speak about the reality in Brazil. We do also have students that pursue different careers outside, the grad school, and I think that you have to decide how much you want to invest. Maybe in the beginning of your grad school, you can be too much occupied with all the commitments you have to do to get your degree. And so in Brazil, for instance, for the master's or for the PhD, the students have like a number of hours of classes they must take. And so these classes, you cannot arrange different times to do them. So maybe you have to search for alternative times to do whatever hobby you have. But I had one student that was an actress, and she was a master's student, and she also was in a play, and she made time, just as was mentioned before. She would make her schedule work to have her rehearsals and the times that she was in the play, and so that was fine. So it's you have to, it's so hard to really say how someone have to manage their lives, but I mean, you have to find, if you're committed to something, you have to be true to that, and also to make whatever you have committed to do.
Right, thank you. And so I will take the next question, which is a very interesting question. So to you, Professor Extavour, first, would you like to share one or two incidences from your other professional activity or the singing that you would see as a milestone in your career? For example, you just said that you did not do the professional singing in the first year of your setting up your lab, but in the next year you started. So would you like to share one or two incidences that you would see, for example, something like akin to publishing a paper or a patent in your other professional activity?
Sure. A couple that come to mind. When I was a postdoc, I did a few operas, and the one that I enjoyed the most was Hansel and Gretel, which is this fairy tale set by Engelbert Humperdinck, and I played the witch. And the role of the witch is extremely fun. She's not a good character. She eats children, and she lives in the woods. But it was very fun because it's opera is fascinating because it combines acting and singing and dance and music, everything at once, art. And so it was a very exciting role to literally play like a made up magic character, singing what I hope is very out of character. I don't eat children. So that was a really fun experience. And one of the singers who played Gretel in that show turned up. We turned up together on stage like 15 years later here in Boston, because she came to be a soloist in a show that I was doing at Symphony Hall. And I thought I recognized her. And anyway, so that was amazing. And then I had another experience just before the pandemic, and hopefully we can resume. How did it go now? I got a call. Somebody called me and said, somebody so-and-so gave me your number. We need singers to do a studio session for a composer who's written a musical and wants to have a recording of what some of the music will sound like so that he can go to different theaters and say, I want to produce this musical. This is a common thing. No theater is going to say, sure, come and do your musical. It's a new musical. Nobody's ever heard it. They need to hear what it's going to sound like. So I was hired for this day of studio singing to learn this music by a contemporary composer, a guy named Bill Banfield. who's fairly famous in the American jazz and contemporary scene, to sing this music so he could have a recording. And he really liked me and he liked my voice. And he said he would like me to do the recordings and possibly the performances when this musical actually takes shape and goes on stage, which we hope will be in the next couple of years. So even if that doesn't materialize, just having the experience of participating in getting this new project off the ground, getting to know this composer who's very interested in some quality that in my voice that he finds useful for his work, just learning about his vision. So we've had many discussions now over the years. That's been a fantastic opportunity that, just came from, he let people who he knew know that he needed some people, and somebody thought, oh, maybe Cassandra would be good for this. And they called me. And so those were some really great experiences that I was glad to have.
That is such an interesting, yeah. So, Sid, would you like to share one or two incidences from your either drumming or orchestra? Yeah.
Sure. So when it all fell apart, when I started in grad school, I also actually met my wife while I was working, and we combined her, I think, journalistic chops with my involvement in the music scene at the time, and started a music journalism initiative that sort of was internal to the company that we were working in. It was just within the internal bulletin boards. And it garnered a lot of interest because I think people felt that for a community where we grew up, that was a little deprived of performance spaces and sort of allowed bands to perform and really be visible to audiences and allow sort of the general, I would say, crowd and public and the youth of that age and that era to partake in such social activities. People saw that as a revelation. Wow, there's someone actually talking about the scene, right? And so that snowballed into us spinning off into like a Facebook entity, which at the time, when Facebook first started, was like a big deal. And then we started a company out of it. And so at one point we were working with like 150 volunteer journalists who would visit these sort of venues where bands were playing, and we would photograph the scene. So we actually helped like propel the careers of some budding photographers in the local scene, which is, again, unanticipated. You can't plan for these things. And out of 9 cities in India, which was really something powerful. We didn't expect that we would have such a substantial presence in the music scene in the format that we did. And so that was something that we were very, very excited about seeing. We're trying to go global now. We've connected with folks in the UK. We have some folks local in the New York area. So all of this is sort of happening, again, organically. It's a passion project. It is not something that we truly milestone, but it's nice to sort of say that there is a quantitative output at the end of 10 years of doing this. So that's just fascinating. I am in awe. I sort of take a very third person perspective on occasion to sit back and think and reflect and say, wow, this came out of a passion for music. Like, who knew that, this little kid who listened to Pink Floyd and Dire Straits because my dad would play that in the house would then have a company that supported the music scene 30 years later. So it's always nice to connect the dots in hindsight, like I said earlier, but also it's organic, and it's just, you should just let it be. So sorry, I know I keep falling into the advice category, but I really feel so strongly about it because of what it meant to me. And so that's the milestone, if there was anything that you could call a milestone.
Of course, I would definitely call that too. And Dr. Marimelia, would you like to share an incident from your past professional running that you've been to, or any future event that you're planning on participating in?
Yeah, so during the pandemic, as I said in the beginning, I work with the molecular and cellular mechanisms of brain cells response to stroke and trauma and neurodegeneration. So I get a lot of, although I do basic science, I get a lot of emails and contact from patients, from stroke survivors or people with Alzheimer's, and asking for new developments in the area. And during the beginning of the pandemics in 2020, I was contacted by Stroke Survivor Association, and that asked me to talk about I'm sorry, my cat is here. So to give a talk in an online event to several stroke survivors. And then I began to make contact with them through Instagram mainly. And then when we started having races again, because 2020 and 2021, most races were canceled. And then when we started having races again, I decided to do a 75-kilometer race last May. So this is about 46 miles. And I decided to dedicate each kilometer to one stroke survivor. And I shared the stories in my Instagram account. And then I actually made I have two different accounts. One is for science and lab material, and the other one is my runner Instagram. And then I posted in both of them. And so every day I would share one story. And then when I did the race, each kilometer was dedicated to one of these people. And what happened was they kind of created a community among them, a support community for these stroke survivors. And also we could tell people, you know, about the risks for stroke, brain stroke, and what you have. And exercise has a lot to do with prevention and rehabilitation. So I think this was, my running was a platform to, you know, make this subject more evident for people that that they were not worried about this. So I think this was a very, I was very happy with the outcome, not the race outcome, but with, you know, this platform that was created, and the sense of community that we have in running. And it was translated into these stroke survivor community as well.
Thank you. And I would say that is like helping science or instilling science and community when you're not actively doing science. So thank you for that. So my next question is to you, Professor Extavour. When do we expect a solo record from you?
I'm not working on anything. I mean, it's not an active sort of thing on my to-do list to do. I mean, I would love to, and different people I've worked with over the years, you know, it'd be nice to, but I'm not, it's not an active project. Yeah, right now. You know, some of the people, because I've moved around a lot in science, some of the people who I would really like to do this work with, they don't live in Boston. So, you know, it would require some advanced planning, but maybe. I mean, I've appeared on recordings, you know, in other groups, but not my own solo thing, but maybe.
Okay, we'll look forward to that if at all that happens. So in the interest of time, I'll take just one or two more questions. So this question is to you, Dr. Marimelia. For example, in the research or science, we set some long-term goal and some short-term goals. So in the running, for example, do you see something setting up a long-term and short-term goal that would help people achieve their goals in a more strategic manner?
You mean in running?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Well, yeah. If you want to start running, you have to start slowly and in a low volume of running, meaning very few kilometers or miles per week, and then you increase that, and then it's very helpful to set goals. And for myself, I like to set a goal that I know it's very hard for me in running. So I'm going to say I want to run a marathon. So it's not something that is easy. I have done this before. I know I can do it, but I have to train for that. So if I say I want to run 10 kilometers, I know that I can do that in a shorter amount of time of training. So I like to set like hard goals, and then I know I have to train, because if I don't, I'm going to suffer so much, and I might not be able to finish. So you have to do, of course, you have to find whatever it works for you. So this is what works for me. but also starts, don't overdo it, because it's very easy to get excited and then overdo it and get hurt. So.
Right. Thank you. So we're almost running out of time, but I will take this last question for you, Sid. And this is about the book that you've been talking about. Surely you're joking, Mr. Feynman. So would you like to just briefly touch upon that, and then we'll call it off?
Sure. This should be mandatory reading for anyone pursuing science. I feel like this was formative for me. Again, it's a cornerstone for my life, and it's I think through the antics of this very, very curious, very almost incendiary character, Richard Feynman was. He gave me the freedom, I think, to ask the naive questions, to be a person behind the scientist, like I said in the very beginning, because I think there is a fallacy, and there is, like Professor Extavour was saying about the fantasy of that, oh, you have to be in the lab 24/7. He was a human being. He lived his life to the fullest, and he was a Nobel Prize winning physicist, right? So that was inspiring for me. I think, and it's the story of this individual is told very well. It's written very nicely. It's a very light read, so it's not an academic paper. I'm not pushing another paper for anyone here to read, but it is truly a joyous read because you can take out different meanings from this book, right? So for me, it was this thing of freedom, of just joyful living of life while he pursued hobbies and picked locks, and it's incredible. So surely you're joking, Mr. Feynman, is actually a response to something he said, and that's found in the book. So I highly recommend it.
Okay, thank you. I'm sure most of us will like to read that book now. So with that, the clock is ticking 11 here in California. So I would like to thank all the panelists for today's discussion. I'm sure it had some very valuable insights for all the attendees today. And finally, I thank you all for participating in today's event, and we hope to see you all again in our next workshop Wednesday event. Thank you all. Thank you, Professor.